Hello, everyone. So, my name is Julio. Just to give you a little background about myself, I've been working on the AAA gaming industry for a while, about 12 years. I started my career in BioWare working on Mass Effect 3, making environments for that game and for DLCs of that game. And I also worked on Dragon Age Inquisition, and there I was primarily making 3D models, optimizing the library of models, introducing high detailed models, foliage, sculptures. I was using a lot of ZBrush. And then after that, I worked on the early prototyping stage of Andromeda, but that was shortly before I moved on to work for Bungie. And for Bungie, I worked on Destiny 2, the vanilla Destiny 2, and I was on the Strikes team for a couple years. And then after maybe 2 3 years, I moved on to the PvP team, and that was roughly 2 years of working on PvP maps for Destiny 2. And then the landing. So this is one of the largest, the most ambitious maps that I worked on for PvE content. This is a level that is highly complex. A lot of missions go through it. A lot of designers had their hands on it. And I was working on this from the beginning. So I was designing the level from the most basic blockout and eventually to what you see on screen. It has all the foliage placements, the sculptures, the water features. It was a very prolonged process of taking this level and play testing it and just going through iterations until you get the final version, which is what I'm showing you, what you can play today if you get the final shape. But if you go to 3D brushwork, then you can see more of my work. And because I want to focus on making trims and using them, I wanted to talk about why trims using an older example. So I'm just going to go to my Mass Effect 3 example and scroll all the way down to Mars. I think the screenshot here gives a really good illustration of how trims can be used to create an environment. So when I say trims, I'm talking about the tileable textures, the panels. And if you look at the side details and the railings, and you focus on the individual props, then you can see that there's very thin panels that are being used repeatedly to create the details. There's also panels creating the thin railings. There's panels on the side of the window. There's panels being unwrapped into the pipes themselves. And there's also things there to break up that panel work, because if everything was panels, then it would look very repetitious. So if you look at this, then it has like venting, it has signage, it has like hazard paint, and it has grading, and it has all of the like many different kinds of details, different kinds of surfaces, some metal, some plastic, some rubber. And this way you get a lot of variety material wise and color wise as well. So there's much that we can do with panels, and there's some things that we need to supplement those panels with in order to create a very interesting variety of surfaces. So this is a really good example to show how trim textures can go a long way in creating an environment. And then we have another one here that has a similar approach. If you look at the panels in the ceiling here, panels being used on the pipes and all throughout those hero pieces, like those buttresses, those pillars that are holding the structure together. So it's really, really interesting. I'm going to go and open Spectrum Galaxy, and then we can look at the individual materials that are used in that environment, and I can talk about the process of how I planned for it and eventually made them and took them to substance. It's going to be more like an overview of how it was done. We're not actually going to make them from scratch. Maybe that's for another video, but I wanted to show the content behind the scenes and how it was put together. And I hope you find it interesting. And if you have any comments, anything that you would like to see, just post it down there, and I'll be sure to read it, and I'll do my best to respond. So I thank you very much for watching this, and hope you enjoy. Thank you. So this is the environment opened up in Unreal Engine 5. I'm just gonna fly through and show you some spaces. This is what is called the command center. It has all the consoles and desktop arrangements with monitors and computers, lots of wires. It's very hard surface heavy. And then the space here, it's the grand hallway. You get a lot of natural light lighting the space. It doesn't have a lot of additional light sources, and if they do, they're more for accent or for the nighttime setting. I can turn off the daytime and turn on the nighttime setting. And here you can see the LEDs and the screens lighting up the environment in a stronger way, less dependent on the sunlight that is coming from the outside and more dependent on the LEDs. I'm gonna go back to the daytime setting now and fly to the second level, which is more like the residential corridor. Even though these doors, they don't have any rooms inside of them, it's definitely possible to open up those doors and expand the library or just create different arrangements that would be interiors for these rooms. But in the example map, we essentially have this hallway that you can run around and get a feel for the differences of within the environment and how the assets can be used to create a wide array of variety. So now I wanted to show and talk about the trim textures that are being used in the environment. So if you look at the floor, you can see that there's different kinds of panels being used on the floor and also on the walls. But looking at the floor now, we have a thinner panel that is in the center here. And then we have a large panel that curves into a different size panel here, which is even a larger panel that just composes this section of the floor. So it goes from smaller detail to medium-sized details to larger details. The intention that I have when I was making this environment is that it wouldn't look too noisy. So if you look at these particular pieces here, they don't even have panel break lines. They have the horizontal lines, but if you look at the panel here on the top, it just basically clean all the way through. And it helps balance the overall detail that you see throughout the space. Having the ceilings be cleaner was a decision that I made when I was trying to balance out for the details. And some panels are intentionally a lot more detailed, like this one here. It almost has like a Star Wars greeble kind of vibe to it. And each piece on this kit has a different flavor to it. And this way you can mix and match and try to see which kind of arrangements you can make. Like this wall panel here is much cleaner, but it has a different kind of detail altogether that looks like it was bolted. And then if I go to this panel here, it has a lot more detail. It has like different metal components. It almost looks like parts of a computer that has wires and has even LED details that you can play around with. But in order to illustrate how this environment was put together and the kind of textures that it uses, I'm just going to open up a few of them. So if you look at trims 1, it has quite a number of different panel sizes. Some panels, they actually have an edge to them at the end, and some don't. So these, when you tile them vertically on a texture, they're not going to create a break, neither at the top nor at the bottom. But then these panels here, they do. And we have a thinner one, a medium-sized one, and more squared panels. And these squared panels are the ones that are being used on these pillars here. And they're being used all throughout the environment. So even if I look at the metal consoles, then we would be able to see these kinds of panels being integrated in there as well. Even the The planters have them, the computers, the monitors. Sometimes they're tinted in different colors, and that just gives it a different feel. That way, not everything is white. And that's something you can definitely play around with. Like when you go to this room, it looks much warmer. The carpet details, as well as the wooden details, it helps create variety within the environment. And this side is much cooler, and it's just like a working area where people can work side by side on their computers, navigation systems. But going back to the trims, I was just talking about this trims one. And each trim texture has a different purpose. So when I was thinking about them, I was thinking maybe this one can be used for the floors, can be used for the walls. But what happens if I want something to have even more detail than this? So that's where the trims 2 came about. This is much more metallic. It has wires built in. It has latches. It looks like they could be part of compartments, panels that you can remove, and they would be having something behind them. Some of the details, they're just there to make it look cool, but others are meant to be functional, like these vents that can be used in parts of the environment, and then eventually you can add effects to these, like steam coming out of these vents. And then panel number 3. This one was used for the doors because I wanted to make the doors look unique. And if I make everything from the same panel, what's going to happen is that the variety is going to be lacking. So in some cases, I'll go and make a special texture just for a specific purpose because the doors are special and they rotate into place as you navigate through the environment. This one here. So yeah, this is the way it opens up. And of course, like it opens up outside of the door itself, but that's not something that you see in the environment. In the environment, you just see the rotation, the opening, and then you can walk through. And this is one of the ones that is the most important, I would say, for this environment. It gives the character to the props. So if you look at this, it's actually filled up with electronics. It has a keyboard. It has little screen televisions. It has something that looks almost like a camera. Maybe it could be part of a very unique looking cell phone. And then you have screens that can be used on monitors, and then you have like the front of a computer tower. And it also has panels that can be used for the walls and for many different kinds of assets. This one almost looks like a radio, the one on top. And there's just lots of detail. And I wanted to make this texture as universal as possible. That way I can take it and create many different kinds of props. But this is the one that I would say I placed a lot of effort, thought, and planning in order to get it just right. This one here is just a very large, clean panel. Just one. And like I was mentioning, in the environment, there's areas that have a lot of detail and areas that have less detail that are meant to be clean and easy on the eyes. And for those areas, I just unwrap it into one large panel. And I actually have a texture that doesn't even have the panel normal. It's just a flat color, which is even cleaner than that one. And this one's also used for detail. Like earlier I was flying through and showing a wall that had this detail in it. So a lot of these textures, I make them as I continue to expand the environment, as I continue to add things to it. I think, what else can I use? What else can add interesting detail to this environment? And by looking at references and searching for inspiration, then I start to come up with ideas as to things that I can add, because this texture is something that came at a later stage. Once the environment was mostly done, I was thinking it needs something more just to add more detail, more flair to it. And this gold foil looking texture, it actually adds really interesting details around the doors. And throughout the space, I ended up using it for the pipes as well, and for different versions of the wall. It just adds a very interesting looking shiny and reflective detail, especially with Unreal Engine 5 that has ray trace reflections. It just looks really nice to have that kind of detail. And as I was creating the space, then one of the beauties of having trim textures is that you can really go and experiment and think outside of the box. What can I make with this texture? It already has the folds. It already has very interesting details around the corners. And I ended up actually taking this texture and making a leather version, which ended up being used for furniture. So if I zoom into this material, it's under the leather section. But if I open up the leather texture, you'll see that it's actually the same trim. So when I'm unwrapping things into this leather texture, I don't use this portion. I only use this one on the right, which is the one that looks like leather. And it's being used on furniture, chairs, sofa. So if I zoom into the sofa, you're gonna see that it has the same texture. And I can apply a different leather color, so I can go in and just swap it for the blue or the gray. Yeah. But it's the same texture, just it has an added noise on top of a leather, which is something that the materials have. They have the ability, they give the ability to add a detail normal on top. Yeah, I think the next thing is just to talk about the process of making those trim textures. And I'm not going to make it from scratch. I'm just going to talk about how I arrived at the current result and the software that I used to do that. So this is the file from PureRef that has a lot of the references that I used when I was making the environment. They're separated in order. At the beginning, when I was making the space, I didn't have these references here. I think some of them, as I was developing the environment and I was getting new ideas, I was looking for references for those ideas. So if I zoom in, then you'll see references from Mass Effect 3, from Blade Runner, from Sid Mead. And here I have references for scientific equipment. And sometimes what I do when I'm actually making the props, I'll paste them into the reference file as well. Like this is actually from Spectrum Galaxy. So I paste it in, and this way I can also compare to my original references. Did I do a good job? Can they be changed? Can they be updated? And this is also from Mass Effect 3. Like you see the robotic arms and the designs for the crates, the designs for the wall. And also Shepard is there as a reference, like how big are these props? So yeah, different spaces that I found interesting from different games. This is from Halo Infinite, the one in the center here. And this shot, you can really see the definition of each panel and how they repeat in the environment. But yeah, this is a very modern interior, like a bedroom arrangement with a very comfortable chair with decorations on the wall. And what I found interesting about this shot was the way that the window cutouts were designed. They have the circular shapes. They look really modern. They look really sleek. It almost would be a bit nauseating if the spaceship is moving and you look down and it's made from glass and you can see through into the infinite galaxy. But of course, like some of these ideas, they're meant to provoke the imagination, and some of them not very practical sometimes. But But yeah, another shot from Mass Effect 3. Uh, Different vehicles that I like as well. Um, Sometimes, it's not per se the main hero prop that I'm looking at. Maybe I'm looking at the wires, the colors, how they use the yellow accents, how they use the teals, and and then and the arrangement to make it look all functional. Sometimes those are the things that I look at. Another one from Mass Effect 3. This is a very modern interior. I think in this point we didn't have AI, so it was probably edited by somebody, and somebody pasted the people in there and maybe took the 3D render of an environment. But nowadays with AI, it's just hard to tell which ones are generated and which ones are made by a person. But yeah, you can see all sorts of detail. Like this one is very aspirational to me about the atmosphere, the greenery, the water, the flow. So if I go back to Spectrum Galaxy, and if you look at the window, it might lag a little bit for a second. Hold on. If you rotate here, then you'll see, you know, green hills, lots of trees, water bodies, and the environment itself has a few water features too. Sometimes it's more of the mood that I'm looking at when I look at a screenshot. It might not be the details per se. Like I don't have a space that is similar looking than this. But of course, with the trim textures and the kit, something like this could be done. Something like this could be made. And this one, I really like the curved walls that curve from the floor to the wall and to the ceiling. And also these circular details that look really interesting, that look functional. Um, as the lady goes about the space, maybe she interacts with us to play music or adjust the lighting, something in the environment that's happening that is interactive, and very interesting lighting features, minimalistic design on the furniture. It almost looks like it's floating, like the way it's standing on top of the floor at an angle. Very interesting furniture. And this one I really liked. So this one I was looking at the details of the wall panels, the buttons, and how it looks older in technology, but very modern in its futuristic design and overall aesthetic. And I like the idea of how everything feels so lived in, and there's a lot of attention to detail on the small things like the trash can, the decorative lighting features, and very small cups and uh, glasses, a cigarette that's lit, so it looks like somebody just went out from this room a few minutes ago. Different concepts from Sid Mead, from Mass Effect again, and from Sid Mead as well. Again, here I really like his design of this ship here. This boat looks really modern and slick, and when you break it down, the visuals of it, it also appears to have a similar aesthetic with panel lines, very white, broad surfaces, broken up by black, and metal details that it also extrude from the design itself. And it just looks really functional. It looks a lot of fun, and has very cool details like these umbrellas with different colors. And yeah, this one's also really nice, really lived in, and beautiful details on the ceiling. I think something like this was made in, I might be wrong, but I think it's in New York. It's a restaurant that took this design and they implemented it into almost like a bar. And this is something that I was referencing at a later stage, because at the beginning I mainly created hallways and computer areas, but I wanted the space to feel bigger, broader, more natural light coming in. So similar to the feeling that you get when you look at this one. But then I was thinking practically, how am I gonna execute on these plans? How are the ceilings are gonna look like? And I think this building is in China. What I really liked about it is the design is very minimalistic when it comes to how clean the lines are. But it has many angles. It looks very futuristic, looks functional, has very interesting lighting features, has the way that you see like the railings, how one floor leads to another. It just answers a lot of the questions that I would have when I'm making the environment. So when I was looking at this, I was isolating the references that I thought would be most useful for me, as I don't need to see all of them. I just want to pick out what are the details that I want to implement into the environment. And those shots are the ones that I eventually ended up pasting into PureRef, and they're located here. Like this, I really like the curvature of the walls, and the almost like this grading detail on top, and the very clean metal reflective panel at the bottom. I also like the design of the ceilings, and this very interesting triangular pattern, and the tiles on the floor. There's lots of beautiful details. Like this one, I really like the LEDs, the circles, how it's cut out into the ceiling itself. It's almost like recessed into the ceiling in a very interesting way. And these, I really like how the lighting uh, almost like comes from the back of these very interesting looking curved walls, and how it highlights the just some of the features and how others are obscure in shadow. It just looks really cool, really futuristic, really interesting. This one, I really like how bright it is, how these very large windows, they just allow a lot of the natural light to come in and create a very beautiful space. It could be anything. Like when you look at this, it's not really easy to tell what is the functionality. What do you do in this space? So for me, when I was looking at uh, this building, I was more so thinking about the structure, the walls, the ceiling, but not as much about the functionality, because that I was gonna introduce with my own props. What each room, what the purpose of the hallway was gonna be. Because when you look at these, it's hard to tell. Like in this one, you do have an idea by looking at the LED screens and the graphics and the arrows. But otherwise, like some of these spaces, they can be anything. And I really liked it, so I was looking at these quite frequently when I was designing the environment. And I think it's the most evident when you look at the grand hallway. So you see the large windows with the curved pillars, a very interesting tile, and like the ceiling design as well. But when you look at this environment now, it has all the functionality. It has very small props, it has foliage, it has signage, it has crates and small details, fire hydrants, just to make the space look lived in. It has tables that people have put like notes, a cup, and a camera, interactable consoles that look like they're part of the everyday life of somebody who's in the spaceship. This space primarily borrows inspiration from like these kind of pictures here, with the large windows and the curved pillars. Those are my closest inspirations. And I was looking at these references, then I would think, what kind of details do I need within those trims? If I'm gonna create consoles, computers, lots of machinery, lots of wires, so the trim texture has to have those details present in it, and that way when I unwrap it into the 3D model, it already has that. And these are really good examples, really wonderful references. So one of the first things that I did, actually, opened up Photoshop and I mocked what a texture would look like. And I'm just going to show you now. This is actually not the texture, obviously. It's more of a reference for me when I was thinking, what am I going to put on this environment? What kind of things do I need? Like I want to have computers, so I just searched online and I found an HP computer and I just cropped the image and I put it there. Yeah, like I need a keyboard. I need something that looks like a tablet. And I started like playing this game. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And it's like Tetris. Like how am I gonna fit all of these details into one texture that's essentially a square? And I was just trying to think about the layouts that I would make, something that would be easy for me to unwrap. The measurements are not really all that precise on the texture. It was mainly for me to think about what am I going to be creating, what am I going to be modeling, just to solve for those questions before I actually start modeling in 3D Max. And you know, as I continued to put things in here, computer screens, Apple devices, anything that I find like switches that you find on the wall, details that could be like the side, like a more like a smaller computer, not like a big tower, but something that maybe the monitor sits on top of. I was just looking at very just references and pasting them in Photoshop and drawing over them. And when I created this arrangement in Photoshop, I was happy. I was thinking, you know what, this is something I can take in 3D Max and I can start modeling after. So I'm just going to open up the 3D Max file. And this is the actual 3D model. And when I made this, I was thinking more about the baking of the texture. Like this model is not efficient at all. It's not meant to be in game. It's just very high poly. And some of the details, they're not really welded together. I was more so thinking about how is this texture is going to look like when I bake it down into a flat surface. So some of these details are just on top of the model. And all these models have subdivision. And then eventually they would be baked down into a plane and taken into Substance Designer to add the colors. And in 3D Max, the colors that you see here are just meant to separate the materials. So everything that is light gray is going to be that white panel, and the things that are blue, they're going to be metallic. And the things that are black, they're going to be a different color, maybe like a gray, something to break up the white panel. Maybe in this case, it can be rubber for the keys. But these keyboards, they're meant to look generic, like they can be put into any machine and look functional. But yes, this is a zoom in of all the 3D details that went into creating that trim texture. And then if I open up the models themselves and remove the turbo smooth, then you can see the simplicity of some of these models. It just essentially a cylinder that has a bevel, and it has a couple of supporting lines in order for it to subdivide properly. So now if I go in and apply the subdivisions, and it just looks like a really nice button, and it has very interesting reflective edge. And when I see this in 3D Max, it already looks like it's gonna bake down properly. And this one is just sitting on top of almost another version of itself, and it's just like kind of wider. But yeah, I experimented with different shapes, different details in order to create this texture. And eventually when you look at it from the top down, this is what the texture is going to look like. This part, for example, is behind. I used it a lot and when I was unwrapping the monitors, it's behind the monitor itself. And the front of the monitor would be this. And then this the small monitors would be those. And this is another one that has all the metal uh, details that are meant to break up the large panels throughout the environment to create very unique props and things that I can scatter through the space to add interest. And for any of these, I can go back and look at the model itself and the subdivisions that it has. And in here, it's just essentially rectangles that are rounded off with turbo smooth, and then another turbo smooth on top of that to create that soft edge. And I kept the subdivisions intact, and this way I can always go back and modify them. And these are just the extruded rectangles that were extruded into this panel trim, and they repeat. But eventually, when the subdivisions they go in, they creates a perfect circle. And eventually, that's what's baked into the flat texture. And it has a very interesting details that will show up in the normal map. And this is one of the textures that we saw in the ceiling to create that special pattern. Some of the tiles as well. If I go back, it's just like a very basic 3D model with a couple of extrusions for each panel. And when I'm creating this, I'm constantly flicking this one on and off, and just to make sure that the details of the edges show up in the way that I want. Because I do want the normal map to have these wonderful curved details and highlights. And in this case, the difference between color number 1 and color number 2, that it's really clearly outlined. And this way, when I'm working in Unreal, I have lots of options. And here you can see the model that was used to create the door. And it's just different components. Like sometimes, because I'm baking the texture from the top, I'm not really focusing on, oh, everything needs to be welded properly. Because when I look at this detail, it doesn't, eventually when it's baked down into a flat surface, you're not going to be able to tell that it's actually floating. It looks more like a bowl on top of the flat surface. It's almost like a way to cheat the normal map. But eventually when it bakes down, it just looks like a proper detail that is very seamless and looks like it's part of the original model. And same thing with these. They're just details that are on top of each other. And this detail is actually on top of those other details. And this is the final 3D model. You see it has all these details that were overlapping each other in 3D Studio Max. But eventually they were just baked into a flat surface to create this texture here. So when the texture is baked down, you cannot tell that those details were overlapping on the z-axis the way they were on 3D Max. Like in this case, like everything is on top of each other. But it just makes the modeling much faster because I can take this and I can move it and really experiment with the way I want the details to be arranged. And eventually it's just gonna bake down properly. And I can take details like these and just maybe make copies, make them smaller in case like there's another extrusion on the corner that needs to be rounded off. And this is one of the main trims that is used throughout the space on the floors and walls. Now we're getting closer to the finished product. So this is actually the texture in Substance Designer. This is the one that has all the metal details and the panels, the screens, the computers. So in Substance Designer, I actually exported the high poly 3D model and also a flat plane, and the baking happens within the program. So if I look at the resources here on the left side, you can see that it has trims low, which is essentially just the plane, and it has trims high, and that's the model that is exported from 3D Max that has everything. And then the baking happens here to create these normal maps and ambient occlusion maps, curvature maps, which are eventually used to drive the texture, the details. So here we have a close-up of the AO map that is baked, and this is a close-up of the, I believe is the curvature map. And all of these maps are used in Substance Designer to drive the paint wear, the damaged edges, the metal kind of chipping on top of chipping the paint on the edges. And I wanted to keep it balanced so it doesn't look like it's a lot of that kind of broken edge treatment. But you can definitely see it in a few parts. Some textures have it more than others, but you see here on the edge, a little bit of the metal just kind of shows through. So if I go back to the max file, like the blue color, the yellow color, the gray color, all these were eventually baked into a mask that has black and white selections, and that mask was used eventually to separate what is metal, what is one color and what is the other. So this is like one of the masks that is highlighting the metal pieces, and I believe this is for the white when it's inverted, and then it's being used to drive material blend, which is blending a couple of materials within Substance Designer, which is eventually outputted into the final textures. Like right now, I don't really want to go into specifically how these nodes are connected, but more so just to give an overview of how everything is put together and the logic of creating these trim textures and eventually how they're used in the environment itself. But one of the main things that I wanted to do in Substance Designer is just bring these textures to life and add a color and definition, a different kind of reflectivity to each thing. Like you see the monitors are really reflective, and that really shows up in Unreal in a very beautiful way. Then we have the exported maps, which is the base color map. Here you see it on the right side. It's really clean. It's meant to be really clean, and we have the roughness map. So you see this is like a very shiny monitor. The edges that are broken off are less reflective. Maybe it's dirty, it's dusty. So the white parts are less reflective. Medium gray is a little more shiny, and then eventually black is much more shinier. It's the roughness map. And then we have the metallic map. It's just basically a black and white alpha that separates which parts are metal and which parts are not. And you see this one also has all the edge wear that eventually will show up in Unreal. So if I go and maybe open up Trims 2, you're just gonna see the same thing repeated but with a different texture. The reason why I showed the other one, I felt it had more complexity, more masks, more variety when it comes to the materials. And this one has 3 materials: the metal, the white, and the gray. And well, you can see it went through the same process with the baking of the high into the low, and has like the AO map, curvature map, and everything that was baked down into it. And eventually it goes through the same process to generate the final maps that are sent into Unreal. Now going back to Unreal, now we can look at the material editor itself and then all the options that we have in order to adjust this and to make it look unique. So here I can actually go in and change the color. So the default that came out of Substance Designer was closer to this, but now you can come in and perhaps make it orange, make it blue, any color that you want. You have many other options such as additional reflectivity. If I use the clear coat option here, then you see that automatically it's going to have much more of a reflective look. And this is something that I was using for the floors. I wasn't using it for the walls, but you can use it anywhere that you want. But if you want to go back to the default, you can always remove the checkbox here, and it just goes back to normal. Same thing with the color or anything that you change. Here you have the option to change the emissive. So if you notice these little blinkers, they go on and off, and they show up in the same color that is highlighted here, which is more like a warmer orange color. And I can also just change it, and you'll see real time on the material on the preview on the left side that this is turning on blue now. You can change the frequency of the blinking. You can adjust how much of the AO is influencing the final look of the material. Right now it's set up for 0.75, but if I set to 0, then you're gonna see that the texture just looks overall cleaner and the crevices are brighter. So if I just go back and put 1, you see that the crevices and the divisions between each panel become darker. So it's the 0 and then 1. But that one I set to 0.75, but you can change it to any value that you want. And this is the roughness value for most of the material, and right now it's 0.5. So if I put 0 again, you're gonna see a very highly reflective material. But if I want it to be really rough, then I can just go in and put 1, and then basically what happens is that the screens stay really reflective, but then the white panels are really rough. And there's plenty of options, even the ability to create a pattern within the material and how much of that pattern is tiling. I use it in special cases. This is used on the rugs in order to create a pattern on the rugs, and some panels where I wanted to have some pattern on a broad surface. I wasn't using it like this per se, but anything is up to you as to how you change these settings. So this is a 3D Max file that has all of the models that are being used in the environment. And here you can see breakdown pretty much, very visual of how everything was put together. So if you look at these walls, then you see the corresponding material that's being applied on that particular panel. And you also see the simplicity of the model that is composing this detail, that most of the detail itself lives within the texture, and it's not present in the geometry. Only when necessary to create additional detail, like these extrusions that are coming out. But a lot of the details are present in the texture and not present in the 3D model itself. Yeah, these are all the walls and the different kinds of walls that we have. Like this one has a glass that you can put things behind. And this one has the pipes, and this is a very simple wall that you can really duplicate many times, and it tiles very well. Different kinds of ceilings, different kinds of doors, and then have a size reference of the character, the doors and the tunnels, and the different parts that make that compose that arrangement. I put them next to each other just to make sure they snap on the grid in 3D Studio Max, and that way when I export them to Unreal, the environment is really easy to assemble. You know, when you're creating an environment that's modular, you oftentimes need very unique sizes. So one of the benefits of assembling the environment and having an example map that I'm providing is that as I'm making it, I'm running into needs like, oh, I need a floor to create this idea, and I need a ramp, and I need this or the other. That way I add differences of height within the environment. So as I'm making the environment, I'm also having a list of things that I need to integrate into the library. And here we have all the consoles, light fixtures of different kinds. things that are used on walls just to add detail, and like different crate designs. Yeah, the larger one, medium-sized one, small one, and it's just the whole library. As I was working in 3D Max, I essentially just grab a model and I isolate it, and this is where I go in and start making changes and creating the model itself. Just zooming in and spending some time, maybe grabbing some coffee and creating the 3D model. So this was the map that is provided. It's the Galaxy Overview map, and this one has all the props laid out in a very easy to digest way. They're segmented into sections. We have the props in the center of the map. We have floors, different kinds of architecture pieces, different styles of walls, from larger walls here on the back, from the exterior being the largest, from the walls of the grand hallway being larger, to kind of working your way down in size as you move forward on this map. So I just try to arrange it in a way that's easier to understand. In the architecture set 1, you see it has a different style than the architecture set 2. Set 2 is much more curvy, like the curved details kind of extrude out from the side in a very unique way compared to this one that is much flatter. The architecture set 1, that is, we have ramps that offer elevation changes within the environment, and we also have corresponding floors that have that same height adjustment. And then we see the platforms laid out here in architecture set 3, which is used to expand hallways and just to make them much more vertical and to introduce very interesting angles throughout the space and different material variety. So it's getting a little bigger as you're walking in through this environment, which and then eventually you make it into the pieces that are used in the grand hallway, and then we see the different planters, like the planter that is unique into this hallway that's placed in the corner, and then it just adds a lot of life into the environment. But yes, this is an overview map, and it just has the library of everything that's being used to create Spectrum Galaxy. Yeah, I hope you liked this video and found it useful. We can continue the conversation and perhaps make something new. And if you have any questions, just let me know, put them in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.